I didn't vanish. I didn't give up. It's just time to turn the page on some of this gaming podcast stuff that I've been doing for the past month or two and bring some closure to things. This is MultimediaJay Radio Style for Friday, October 25th, 2019. Let's start the show.
MultimediaJay Radio Style.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you follow me on Twitter, you may be familiar with this screenshot that I posted earlier, Mr. and Mrs. Lightside Sith. That would be Lord Gregorius Goodmain, aka Darth Imperius, and his significant other Ashara Zavros from Star Wars The Old Republic, in a very interesting twist of things, in, you could say, the 11th hour, with only hours left to go on the subscription before it had to be renewed. I canceled my World of Warcraft subscription in favor of Star Wars The Old Republic. The new Onslaught expansion was coming out, and I was thinking about the MMO light stuff that I've been talking about, where there's two tiers of MMO involvement for me. I'm either playing them as content delivery platforms, playing through content and then canceling the subscription, or I'm getting involved day-to-day wise in the world like I am in ESO, which also had some new content come out with the release of Palatine with the latest patch, continuing the Season of the Dragon with the second part of Elsewhere that was supposed to release in the Elsewhere expansion, of course. The expansion had Anequina, Northern Elsewhere, for a while from the launch, and now finally the second part, Southern Elsewhere, is finally in the game as well for ESO. But World of Warcraft, particularly Modern WoW, had gotten to the point where I was just playing it as an MMO that I only play for the story, as I've mentioned earlier. The problem is, if I'm going to play an MMO just to catch up on story content, Star Wars The Old Republic is the one that I should be playing. Star Wars is incredible with the cinematic storytelling. It actually makes up for elements of the game such as the engine, the graphics, and the combat that are a little lackluster. And much like Elder Scrolls Online, Star Wars The Old Republic is an MMO that was lousy when it first came out, and it was chasing World of Warcraft. At the time, actually, when Star Wars wasn't doing very well, I was actually going on podcasts talking about how Star Wars The Old Republic was basically World of Warcraft with lightsabers. But just like Elder Scrolls Online, Star Wars The Old Republic was redone, retooled, and made into something that nowadays is a lot more worth playing than it was when it first came out. And it's free to play as well. The interesting thing about Star Wars' subscription model is that subscribing to the game is basically like buying a budget title at $15 a month. It catches you up on the DLC and the expansion access. So once you subscribe, you get all the DLC, and if you choose not to keep the subscription, you still keep the previously acquired DLC that was included when you subbed. It all depends on when specifically you've had a subscription to the game. But what I've seen with Star Wars players is they'll subscribe to get new content and then be a preferred free-to-play player the rest of the time, if they don't mind, having the perks and whatnot as a subscriber to the subscription system, which is, there are some things that subscribers can do that free-to-play players can't. There are some bonuses here and there. But what's interesting is Star Wars really showed just how even a not-so-large MMO can actually have an optional subscription and still work. But I'm kind of getting ahead of things here. So yeah, I canceled my WoW subscription. I am waiting to see what gets announced at BlizzCon. Some of what Blizzard has done has made me think that there probably will not be any good news at BlizzCon. I don't think Blizzard's going to show that they've learned their lesson. And so today's podcast is about gaming podcast closure, where I go over all the remaining things to talk about with this discussion on MMOs and World of Warcraft and Star Wars and other stuff, so that I don't just vanish as I'm playing through all this story content in these two games. So first, let's clear the board with World of Warcraft and what's going on with that. So WoW is in a pretty nasty situation right now. as I found out when I started playing Star Wars again, because here's Star Wars, a game that a lot of people can't believe is still operational. But if you go to the Imperial fleet, the space dock, and you look at the chat is very busy. There's people actually talking as they play this game. There's actual socialization happening in one of the faction capitals. But if you go to WoW, it's all silent. It almost makes you wonder if you have to join Discords just to communicate with other WoW players. And so I saw with modern WoW particularly that nobody was really saying anything. Folks were just going through the motions. It was almost like they weren't even people that were playing that game. Here I was looking for a non-raiding guild for leveling and social type stuff, so that way it could be, goody two-shoe, helping people progress on their way to being able to raid via the new party sync system, which I still have not gotten a chance to use in that game. And nothing. Absolutely radio silence in that game. So when an MMO that people can't believe is still around, like Star Wars The Old Republic, seems to have people having more fun instead of just going through the motions and grinding, that's when you realize, hey, if I'm going to be playing MMOs based on getting story content done, it would actually be better if I was playing Star Wars than World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. I mean, I got a character to max level in WoW. I was working on playing through the story, but some of the gated stuff, like having to get reputations up and things like that, I just, there are other games where you can play the game and actually progress, as opposed to WoW, where you have to do some rep grinding and whatnot and progress X amount through the original story of BFA's launch in order to get into the later stuff like Najdatar and stuff like that. And I just figured, there's games out there that don't punish people for wanting to play catch up in the story like that, so we'll just play those instead. Blizzard also hasn't really been leaving a good taste in my mouth, so to speak, with the new corruption system that they're testing on the 8.3 PTR right now. As it stands versus Titan Forging, it does not address the issues with RNG that are annoying people in the game. And actually, if I read the blue posts from the community manager on how corruption works and what their itemization philosophy is, Blizzard these days is coming off as a crappy knockoff of ZeniMax with ESO. Because if you look at the ZeniMax discussions on their forums about various changes to ESO, what you'll see is the ZeniMax staff will put their rationale very close to the announcement about the changes. So they'll say, this is getting nerfed, and then right next to it, they'll post what their rationale is for making the decisions that they made. Blizzard is starting to do that, but it's pretty easy to spot that this happened in ZeniMax land first. I mean, Blizzard used to have the Blizzy knows best thing a lot more overtly than they do right now, where developers were in blue text on the forums, basically wagging their fingers at the players and stuff like that. So, but the fact that I saw this with ZeniMax first with ESO just tells me that at least Blizzard's trying to play catch up, but they're not really getting it across very well. Because if you look at their itemization philosophy with the release of the corruption system, you'll see that it's just that these folks don't seem to get it. Maybe the investors that were worried about the whole Diablo Immortal fiasco last year were right. Blizzard is just too out of touch with their customer base to really have productive dialogue anymore. I should probably also blow the lid on the whole corruption system not being all that original of an idea in the first place when it comes to RPGs. If you've ever played a role-playing game that had cursed items in it, where they were extremely powerful but they had serious drawbacks if you used them, I've seen them in plenty of offline RPGs over the years, then this corruption system doesn't really seem all that original. Again, perspective. If you only play World of Warcraft, you might think that corruption is a great idea. But once you've played WoW and something else, now this thing that Blizzard is trying to sell you as this great new feature doesn't look so much like a great new feature. And considering the corruption system has an element of RNG in it, and it doesn't address the RNG issues with Titan Forging and whatnot, it doesn't really give me high hopes for BlizzCon, because what I'm looking for from the Blizzard devs who take the stage is the lessons they've learned from the success of Classic. You know, the successes that WoW Classic has seen since it launched, what has Blizzard learned from that? And how are they going to fix the modern game to reflect a lot of these successes that are now coming back into circulation, so to speak, with the launch of Classic? Because if you look at just the experiences I've had in these games, World of Warcraft is the worst. From players, the way they act in groups and the stuff they expect, and the out-of-control Lich King-style meta, which I thought would have been addressed by now, and the radio silence on the chat channels, even in major cities and faction capitals, almost making you wonder if you have to use Discord just to talk to other players in that game. And of course, Star Wars The Old Republic, people are a lot more amicable. Same thing with ESO, and I dare say even Guild Wars 2 has a more vibrant chat scene and whatnot in the cities, with the player base and whatnot actually talking to each other and trying to work together on things, as opposed to what I see in Borealis or Stormwind or Orgrimmar or the Zuldazar place and whatnot for the Horde. It's just, Blizzard is in a really bad spot right now. Even though they have what's-his-name coming in from Microsoft's Xbox division, it's just, they're not in a good spot. And this is before we start talking about all the Blitzchung stuff and things along those lines. Blizzard needs to make some very serious announcements that they are doing things differently at BlizzCon. But what I'm seeing in the run-up to BlizzCon gives me no reason to believe that we're going to hear any good news whatsoever at this conference. I'll wait and see anyways. But in the meantime, I have loads of story content that I never got around to in Star Wars The Old Republic to play through, including being an Altaholic. Again, with the cinematic storytelling, there are stories behind all of the class archetypes like Sith Warrior, Sith Inquisitor, etc. So I can be entertained just from leveling alts, because the cinematic storytelling is basically like watching your own animated Star Wars movie with your character as the star, making the dialogue choices and things along those lines. Star Wars does that the best. What that also unfortunately means is that Star Wars The Old Republic is pretty terrible as a game you want to make YouTube videos about, because not only is the soundtrack licensed, so you might run into content ID issues with Lucasfilm and the movie soundtracks in that game, but also because of the cinematic storytelling, you kind of sort of don't want to spoil things for people, because it's just that good of an experience. You can watch people spoiler videos on YouTube and get all the class stories that way. It just won't be your character doing the talking or whatnot. But considering it's free to play, and buying a month of subscription time basically turns it into a budget title if you cancel 1 month later and become a preferred customer or whatnot, or go to preferred status, I would definitely say that Star Wars is a game that is worth playing on your own and experiencing on your own. And especially because it's free to play. You can start a character and see if you like it or not. Continue if you do. Otherwise, hey, it was worth a shot. So, what I particularly like about Star Wars is that BioWare really tried to encourage players to experiment and go off the beaten path. If you play a light side Sith Inquisitor, it makes no sense whatsoever that you are a member of the Sith Empire and you are a Sith assassin who uses the light side of the Force. Maybe if you play enough Assassin's Creed games, that might make a little more sense. But the storytelling behind not trotting down the beaten path and making all of your Imperial characters into a clone of Darth Vader is actually pretty cool. It's one of those nice little surprises. I hear light side Sith Warrior is pretty funny too. But just the entertainment value of just these stories that you can go light side, dark side, and it's interesting either way, and sometimes more interesting if you go against the grain. It's just one of those cool things that Star Wars The Old Republic does really well. Now, in terms of other stuff that's going on right now, there's other things I want to podcast about that are not gaming related, and I want to have more stuff going on this channel besides podcasts. I noticed that people liked my WoW comparison video from a while back, even though I think it could have been better. And there's some more stuff on the hardware side of things for me to do some tinkering with as well. that I want to do. I just have to get my project area back in order to do that kind of stuff again. But I would like to see more of a variety than just podcasting all the time. I'll just tell you right now, it's late October 2019 as I record this, and one of the reasons why I've been podcasting most of the time is I really haven't had much of a sleep schedule for the past month and a half. I had a situation with the 9-to-5ers where I had to temporarily train on day shift for a job that I started a while back, and I'll tell you, it's one thing to go from nights to days and to go from days to nights, but when you go from one to the other and you know it's temporary, and you know you can't get too attached to the schedule because you're going to eventually go back, that's probably the worst out of all of this type of stuff. The only reason I've been getting any amount of sleep for the past month and a half is Z-Quil. I've been trying to get to the point where I can actually have a sleep schedule again that doesn't require medication in order to maintain. And I would like to get to the point where I actually have energy at certain times of the day again because I actually have a sleep schedule again. But I'm not quite there yet. And that's been part of the reason why I've podcasted up a storm for the past month and a half because, let's face it, as if getting old didn't suck enough, getting old and having no energy is even worse. So, yeah, it's pretty lousy when you're just working and sleeping all the time, but hey, at least you're finding some way to make money if that's the case. But yeah, at some point there will be a wider variety of stuff on this channel that I'm uploading than what I've been doing for the past month and a half. The challenge is just getting there. And with that, let's close the book on some of this gaming podcast type stuff for a while. Now watch, there'll be some big news story that makes me want to jump on the mic again or something in a day or two, or at BlizzCon, I don't know. But let's see if we can do something about this situation, or just enjoy some good times in Star Wars The Old Republic and Elder Scrolls Online. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.